Hi there, and welcome to Seconds Out Live. I'm Danny Flexen, delighted to be joined by Josh Hart. And what a weekend's action we are coming off. Just before the main event started on Saturday night, I was thinking, God, I hope this really delivers because the undercard hasn't been as good as I thought it was going to be. And then, boom, we get what may even be the British fight of the year so far. Incredible action, start to finish. Not the most technically adept at all times, but who cares? You know, they absolutely beat the living daylights out of each other. And there seemed to be a modicum of respect at the end, maybe more so between the respective fathers and sons, or the switched over fathers and sons. But I think Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn probably do think a lot more of each other than they did on the way in. I think one of them, or both of them, even said that after the fight. Josh, just before we go to the chat for the first time today, what was your initial reaction at the end of those 12 enthralling rounds?
I was just in awe almost of what I was seeing. When you look at the build up and going off my predictions for it, I was saying I think Conor Benn was going to get to Eubank inside 6 rounds, but I think the general consensus from a lot of people that I spoke to about it was that this fight would be over early inside 6 rounds. So to see it go 12 rounds, but not just 12 rounds, but when you look from 6 onwards, how tough those rounds were for both Conor and Chris, you can only sit there and really take your hat off to them and just say fair play for standing there and just dishing it out like that to each other. That looked like there was not one bit of quitting either of them or one bit of doubt that they were going to stop fighting. So I was just in absolute awe of it all, and especially like you mentioned, coming off the back of that undercard where it lacked a bit of entertainment at times. I have to say I was quite impressed with the Chris Smith Brandon Glanton fight. I thought that was quite entertaining, but away from that, it was a bit of a tough undercard to watch at times. So to get that main event, just fair play. And whether we see it again or not, it's not going to take any shine away from Saturday night and what I think was probably one of the best nights of British boxing that I've seen in a very, very long time.
And we will be talking about the undercard, although I've just kind of not really sold it to you particularly well. We will be there are important results that came out of it, so we will be talking about that in segment 2. We've still got loads of angles to the main event to discuss, but we are the most interactive show on boxing YouTube, so thank you for tuning in. But we'd be nothing without the chat, so please do get your questions and comments in, along with your thumbs up or thumbs ups and your subscribes if you're not already a subscriber. Dangerous, just like the fight was. They've had the fight now. It's been settled. Move on. Aaron Edwards says, after that fight, I think both of those guys will be shot by gangs or something. No. And I also thought it was the wrong decision. I had it a draw at best. Chris C says, drop the rehydration clause or no rematch as it is too dangerous. Pokemon Collectors just says, yo. So yo to you too. Jesus Juarez says, yeah, it was supposed to be a draw. Ash Barr says, no rematch needed. Chris Eubank beat the whole system and Conor Benn. Conor wrong there, just so you know. Kev13 says, question to team, where does that fight rank in Benn Eubank family trilogy? I mean, I'd say probably slightly below fight 1, but much, much better than fight 2. Josh Hart wasn't even born when either of those fights happened. I can answer for him on that one.
I'm glad you answered that before I could. I'm very glad you've done that.
TB says, I prefer Benn to fight Harlem. Either that or meet Eubank at his weight. He's come down twice now. Jim Smith says, greatest fight I've seen in 28 years of watching boxing, I think. It had everything. JDM, he also says no rematch. JDM says no rematch. Eubank beat the cheaters and scumbags single-handedly. Marky B, says, yes, Danny, how are you, Mush? I'm great, thanks, Mush. Good to see you, bro. Good to see you too, Marky B. Fabian Asensio says, move on, please. This is insane. This is what we asked on the thumbnail image. Rematch or move on. Fight for some real titles like your dad's, for heaven's sakes. All right, well, we'll get into that, but I think we should discuss the fight before we get into what's next. Obviously, we do want to talk about whether there will be a rematch next up or whether they'll go their separate ways. But Josh, when you were watching the fight, say 4 rounds in, how much did it adhere to what you were expecting to see after 4 rounds?
I think after 4, I was fairly satisfied and kind of thought, yeah, this is kind of what I expected. Conor Benn to come out quick and try and make a statement, get Eubank out there. And you could see that with the way Conor came out. He did come out 100 miles an hour and try to take him out. But Eubank got into the fight a lot quicker than I thought. After 3 rounds, I had it 3 rounds to Conor Benn, 3-0 to Conor Benn. But I saw some people say probably 2-1 to Conor. Obviously, people giving the first round to Eubank. I didn't see it personally. But yeah, I thought the only part of me that was doubting it at that point was I didn't think it was going to go inside 6 at that point because Eubank was already giving it back. I thought the first 6, just based on what we'd seen throughout the whole week with the weight cut, I thought Eubank would, if he was going to try to take the fight late, he would not do anything for those first 6 and just try catch Conor late, praying that he gasses out. But from the first bell, Eubank was trying to dish it back. He landed some good uppercuts in those early rounds, as they kind of land some good right hands in those early rounds. And it was just a much more like even competitive fight than I think anyone predicted. I don't like we all predicted the fight to have that excitement factor, but not a back and forth shootout for 12 rounds where you even saw it in the post-fight press conference. Conor Benn said, "Chris still isn't my cup of tea, but I like him as much as I can now." Go to just 24 hours before, you couldn't pay Conor Benn any penny to say he likes Chris Eubank Jr. So it just shows how mind-blowing the fight was, I guess you could say, for it to be that competitive.
Yeah, see, the thing that I think elevated this beyond, so if it was just 2 random guys, domestic level, fighting each other and they produced the same action that we saw, I don't think people would be remembering it as warmly. And I don't think it's just recency bias. I think it's the drama aspect. So, Senior turning up at the last minute, although, my view is that was planned all along and they just fooled us all. But that Senior coming to the ring midway through the fight to give advice to Eubank Jr.'s trainers. The fact that they wouldn't break for about the first 6 rounds every time they came into a clinch. They were delaying the break and were refusing. They were giving each other evils and talking to each other when the bell went for the end of the rounds. The talking, the taunting, if you like, from Eubank Jr. continued throughout most of the fight. And that was brilliant. But then as it got more grueling and as they both took several heavy shots from each other, you could see they kind of earned each other's respect through the lack of extra action, through the lack of taunting, and they were breaking straight away. And they were kind of breaking without the ref telling them at times as well. They kind of both thought, right, it's your turn now. No, it's your turn now. And they both needed a breather at the same time. And you could tell they were landing their humongous punches and they were having an effect, obviously. They were busting each other's faces up. They rocked each other on occasion, but you could tell they weren't going to stop the fight. It became obvious after, say, round 8 or 9 that it was going to go the distance. And you could tell that both men had kind of accepted that as well. And the fact that shift in how they felt about each other from kind of hatred, anger, arrogance to grudging respect, all within those 12 rounds. It's like boxing as, a TV episode or a film. Do you know what I mean? And I think that elevates it beyond a standard 12-round humdinger, which it was in its own right as well. Let's just go back to the chat and then we'll talk a little bit about the result. Where are we? Jim Smith says, I think it was better than the Eubank versus Ben one, the father's fight. Yeah, I mean, I think the first one was really good, the seniors, but the draw, the second fight was awful. Thunder Road says, Danny returns and Josh Hart is back. Instant like. Hit the thumbs up chat. Yes, please do. We endorse that from Thunder Road. Cuss's System. Hi, Dennis. He says, I expected a great fight and I think we got it. I do not want to see a rematch. I would like Conor to fight at 147 and Chris to move up in weight. We should put out the poll, actually, as it's the central question in our headline and our thumbnail. Vinny, Modfather Vinny, if you can hear me, if you need me to put this in our group chat so you can copy and paste it, that's fine. But we're going to ask Eubank Jr. versus Ben, would you like to see a rematch next? So let us know. Vote. I mean, most of the chats have said no, but let's see what you guys think, and I'll put that in here. But let's go back to the result. So I had it. Did I score it round by round? I think I was trying to keep track of it. I'm trying to remember what my final score was. I think I had it 115, 113 to Eubank, but I could have seen 116, 112 as well, which I know all 3 judges had it. I thought Ben won the majority of the early rounds, but not by much, maybe 4-2 after 6. Eubank worked his way into the fight, and then it was kind of 50-50 for the last few rounds, but I just think Eubank tended to have the cleaner shots, and he was the one coming forward, pushing Ben back against the ropes a lot of the time as well. But yeah, either 7-5 or 8-4 in rounds for me. Josh, what did you think by the end?
See, at the end of it, I think I tried to score the fight myself, but after about round 8, I kind of just went sack scoring this. I kind of started just to enjoy the fight. But just looking on the eye, I think a draw would have been a really fair result. I think they both did so much. Speaking to some people that I know, a lot of people I've been speaking to have been saying they thought Conor Benn won when you look at the fight. But I think when I first watched it, if I thought someone was going to win if it wasn't a draw, I was leaning to Conor Benn because there was a lot of moments in that fight where I'm convinced Eubank's legs weren't under him. And it was on more than just one occasion. And I know that 12th round might go down as a round of the year. But I was seeing it a lot in that second half of the fight where Eubank's legs just didn't seem under him. And it seemed like he was just holding on to Conor Benn every time he got hit just to stay on his feet. And the thing I neglected at the time was the fact that once Chris had got Conor to the ropes, he was landing. He was throwing back and he was landing. Even if they weren't the biggest and most effective of shots, he was landing. So I think watching it again on second glance, probably about an hour later when we were going through the big rush on Saturday night of getting all the content out to our great viewers, I had the fight on again in the background and just scoring it there. I kind of can see why Eubank won, but I still think in my head, I think a draw would have been the perfect result because then it creates that argument for a rematch. And we'll get onto that obviously, but it would give the rematch more legs to stand on had it had been a draw.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are talking about the weight and the rehydration, obviously in the build-up and since when discussing a rematch. I thought Eubank looked a bit laboured at times. I thought, the weight definitely hurt him. I know people saying, oh, he only missed it by a small amount, but that's how you know that he tried his hardest to get down to the weight and there was just no more to come off. I was glad he was able to rehydrate, obviously not above the limit, which is good as well. But yeah, he looked laboured at times. His legs didn't look there. And I know a lot of people have said, yeah, I mean, he's been making that weight for so long now, he can't do it anymore. He should go up to 168. They may have a point, but you've got to also remember he's significantly the older man out of the two. And it might just be that, he's got a bit older. He's a bit faded compared to his very best. And that might be the reason why the legs have gone a bit. It's not necessarily related to the weight. From view, although I think he looked strong and his engine was pretty good still for 160, he still looked fast as well, fast hands, fast feet. The flip side of that is that I thought he looked by far the smaller man in there. Like when they came together at first for the head-to-head, even as they've been doing it after the weigh-in and after the press conference, Chris Eubank looked several divisions bigger, not just one. This wasn't so much like Kell Brook against Golovkin, although Golovkin still did look bigger than Kell. But the size disparity was greater, I thought, for this than for that one. And Golovkin was never a big middleweight anyway. Chris Eubank Jr. is a big middleweight. But Conor Benn didn't even look like a light middle in there, to be fair, super welter, as we call it these days. So I think if you're looking at the two of them, I think it's probably going to be Conor Benn and his team who are less likely to want to go again at middle. Also, the fact if Ben comes in at, say, 156 like he did this time for the rematch, it's going to be even harder to get back down to 147. He is incredibly muscle-bound and strong at welterweight. So the longer he spends at a weight that's higher than his natural one, the more difficult he's going to find it if he does eventually want to get back down. Because bear in mind, if he fights the rematch with Eubank, it's still not going to get him a world title, even if he wins. If his main aim is to get a world title, that has to be at 147 or maybe at 154, but that's a tough division. So I know the Barrios fight's been mentioned for the WBC. I think that's a winnable fight for Conor Benn. I think he'd need to be better than he was against Eubank. But I think a lot of the things that were wrong with Ben's performance, he was a bit wild, especially in the early going, and he tired out quicker than we're used to seeing him. I think a lot of that was to do with the emotion of the occasion and the opponent that he was against. I don't think those obstacles will be there against someone like Barrios. So, yeah, I mean, I've given away what I would vote in the poll, obviously. But let's just go to the chat and then we can get Josh's tuppence worth. Thunder Road says, actually surprised to see Danny on Monday after Liverpool won the title. Thought he'd be recovering from a piss up. No, I mean, I'm not a big drinker anyway, but we've known we were going to win the title for so long already. But yeah, obviously delighted with that. Jim Smith said it wouldn't have been possible without the first Eubank Ben fight, though. No, of course not. I mean, there would have been no rivalry to speak of, no dynasty. But I think they proved themselves in their own right with the quality of this fight. The Suff says, I've missed you guys. No rematch, please. Martin Mulligan, Eminem, says, decent fight. No technique, though. Media going a bit overboard about how good the fight was. The Suff says, that was not a draw. No way. Exciting fight. Not interested in a rematch unless there's title involved. Glad it's over, though. They got on previously. I hope Conor and Junior look back on this fight fondly and get on. Comics and Sneakers says, Conor looked to have had a chance because he was fighting a weak Eubank. Eubank looked laboured because of the rehydration. A 60 to 70% Eubank beats Ben. The fight was made for Ben to win and he lost. Jim Smith says the entrances were awesome and I have to watch the fight again to decide who won. Yeah, I said weeks ago, I hope that Eubank Jr. would come out to Simply the Best. And he did, although I don't know about having 3 different entrance themes per fighter. I'm not a massive fan of that. The Suff says the disadvantages were not in Eubank's favour. Rehydration clause, major factor. Weight class itself, plus the ref never warning Ben individually once throughout the fight. Yeah, but what about the disadvantage of Ben just being by far the smaller man? You can't just ignore that. You know, he would have been not as powerful, not as physically strong, you would think, and not as rangy. Comics and Sneakers, if Ben couldn't beat Eubank at his worst, how on earth do you think he'll beat him at his best? Why do you assume Eubank would be at his best in a rematch? I can't imagine Ben would go beyond 160. Or are you saying if they take the rehydration clause away? The Suff said, hand in Eubank Jr.'s face pushed 3 times at least, no warning. It's as if they were trying to make him fail on purpose. Also, behind the scenes, mind games from Eddie Hearn, surely with Billy Joe checking the raps. Conor had mentioned that on the Thursday, though, so it's not like Eubank Jr. wouldn't have been prepared. And they clearly were because they wouldn't let him in the changing rooms. And there were mind games on both sides, in fairness. Most people felt Eubank Jr. was winning the pre-fight mind games before fight night itself. As for the referee, I actually thought it was quite good. You know, he brought them together, had a word with them to tell them to tidy things up a number of times, but he didn't take any points and he didn't ruin the fight. He didn't break them too early. He just tried to let it flow as much as possible. That was Victor Lachlan, and I thought he did really well in doing so. I think that's one of the reasons why it was such a good fight. Thunder Rose says, no DB Cooper one in the chat yet. Hopefully this summons them. Them? Is that his pronoun? Dom Allen 11 says, Eubank 116, 112 seemed perfect to me. Jim Smith says, simply the best to his father, Enya for his brother, and still Dre for himself. Yeah, I understand the point of it. It's just, I think just one song played fully, I think is more dramatic impact. And I don't think everyone in the crowd, or the majority of the crowd, would have understood those references anyway, except for simply the best, of course. Comics and Sneakers says, take the rehydration clause away, fella. Mickey Dub says, decent scrap, but time for Ben to move on. Eubank really hasn't got many more fights of any note to go for now. Yeah, that's a good point as well. So what people are saying at the moment is that perhaps Ben goes on to fight Barrios, Eubank goes on to fight Canelo, a fight that's been mentioned quite a lot. Canelo, of course, in action this weekend. We'll be talking about that in segment 4. Josh, what do you think in terms of a rematch? Would you like to see it again? And if so, would that come with any changes?
I don't really have too much interest in a rematch. Like, just based on what we saw on Saturday, where we mentioned how good the fight was, and I don't think you get anything better than what we saw. And it was just quite a definitive result. You know, okay, I know I've just gone off the back of this here saying, obviously, I thought it was a draw, but the general consensus is that Eubank was the winner. So if there's no real debate and no real legs to stand on for a rematch, you know, especially with how much concern there was coming into the fight about, you know, Eubank Jr. getting down to middleweight. While there's that whole argument of, oh yeah, he's had his last 5 fights here, the weight cut's never going to get any easier. He's getting older, the weight's harder to come off. So while it is his weight for the last 5 years, it doesn't mean it's not hard for him to make it. It's an irrelevant argument that he's always been fighting there. He still has to boil himself down. It's the same thing. And I spoke to Gareth A. Davies last night, and I spoke to Duke McKenzie as well, and there's just no rematch interest from anyone, really. I think the only person who is interested in it is Turkey. Turkey apparently already has Tottenham Stadium booked again for September, so I'm sure he'll be back out there putting them back on. And while we say we're not interested in a rematch, if it does get made, we are going to watch it. Like, you're not going to go, oh, no, I don't want to watch this fight. You're going to watch it. It was really good, and we could get that again. If they are to rematch, I'm not sure about whether to take the rehydration clause away, because I don't really think that was the issue in the end. I think the issue was making middleweight in the first place. So unless you go to a catch weight and say maybe make it at 162, 163 maybe, just so he doesn't have to have that weight miss, because that, again, I was saying this to Gareth A. Davies yesterday, have we ever seen a more, like, has there ever been more anticipation for weigh-in results? Because obviously they had the behind closed doors weigh-in before the ceremonial. I don't think I've ever seen so many people tweeting just about one man's weight in particular. And it shows that it was almost a bigger talking point than the fight itself, and that's why it led to the predictions that were being made, and the fact that no one thought this was going to go the distance. So if a rematch is going to get made, either bump up the weight a little bit, not to super middle, and if you're not going to bump up the weight, then take away the rehydration clause, because it would be interesting to see how Eubank gets on without having to hold his weight down overnight for an extra night. But then again, if they take the rehydration clause away, I feel we already kind of know how a second fight would go, and I think I'd be confident again this time in saying the fight wouldn't go the distance, but I'd be picking the man who I thought was going to win. I'd be switching to the other man, and I'd probably back Eubank Jr. to stop him inside 6 rounds next time, if that's without a rehydration clause, just for clarification.
Yeah. I hope you told that to William Hill or whoever you placed your bet with. Other bookmakers are available, of course. Yeah, I mean, I think if they're going to make it as commercially successful as the first fight, they need to change something in Ben's favour, not Eubank's. I think if you put Eubank, either a catch weight or no rehydration clause, he'll be more heavily favoured, and he was the winner of this fight. So why would people tune in to see if Ben can get his revenge? It would seem less likely. Like, Ben needs a narrative, doesn't he? I don't mean he needs it personally. I mean to make them fight a commercial success. Ben needs to come out and say, yeah, he did beat me. At the end of the day, maybe the weight was a bit much by the end. If I have another fight at middleweight, I'll come in a bit bigger, maybe 158. And, Chris will have to still do the rehydration, so maybe that'll even things up. Or he could say, I wasn't able to get him out of there, but that was because of my conditioning. I'm going to be even better conditioned next time. I'm bringing on a new coach who specializes in mental preparation, whatever it might be, to calm the emotions. But there needs to be some sort of narrative to say Conor Benn's got a better chance in the rematch than he had in the first fight. Otherwise, why are people going to pay to see the fight again? They'll pay to see it because it's a good fight, but it's not going to have the same historic value and commercial value as the first one. These are the sons meeting for the first time, both dads in their corners, the big entrance. These are all things that happen for the first time in a long time on Saturday night. So you're not going to have any of that. So unless it's just a repeat, and, that's not going to do as well as the first one, you need something to suggest this is going to be, potentially leveling it up and leading to a trilogy. So that's something. If Conor Benn's watching, or Eddie Hearn, they might want to have a think about how they're going to sell a rematch. And I know Eddie Hearn, if you ask him, if you see him this week or whatever, he'll say, it doesn't need selling. It's Chris Eubank and it's Conor Benn, and the first fight was amazing. Why would it need sell it? But if they want it to be as good as commercially or surpass the first fight, then I think they do need some sort of narrative evening up the odds. But we'll see. Let's see what the chat is saying. Quite a lot by the look of it. Sorry, I don't want to repeat any we've already done. Right, here we go. Dom Allen 11 says, for fans to scream robbery is quite ironic. Thank you, Alanis. Max says, did Turkey pay Senior to turn up? I mean, I think that it was a setup all along. I think, Senior stuff that he did, including on our channel, to say how against the fight he was. I think that was disingenuous. I think it was all to set up the big reveal on Saturday night. Because even when Eddie Hearn was confronted about it, it's, oh, no, we didn't know anything about it, kind of tongue-in-cheek. So, yeah, wouldn't surprise me at all. In fact, that's what I expect to have been the case. Where are we? The stuff says, I almost cried at the reconciliation between father and son. You've got to believe that reconciliation happened behind closed doors before it happened on the night. Jim Smith said, why did the announcer say Eubank is from East Sussex? Is he not proud to say he's from Brighton or something? Yeah, I'm not sure. Where did he say Ben was from? Did he say Ben was from a town, or did he say he was from Essex? Because it might be that they were just doing it as counties and wanted to be consistent. But yeah, I did think that was odd. I found it odd as well. I should just put this in, just a random thing, but I found it odd that Tom Treber was the ring announcer. I'm guessing that because it was a co-promotion between Matchroom and Boxer, neither of them were allowed their usual MC. So David Diamante for Matchroom and Big Mo for Boxer. So they went with Tom Treber, who we're used to seeing announce Frank Warren's shows. But yeah, fair play. He did an excellent job. I'm sure the East Sussex thing wasn't his choice. Nightlife says Eubank takes a gimme fight, fights Canelo next May, and then Ben rematch, but at a different weight. Not sure. I can't see Ben going all the way to 168. Zambanu Love says Hearn bashing Billy Nelson for putting Bacoli in overweight versus Parker, but that's a lot less dangerous than a depleted fighter having to make weight. Yeah, didn't someone say, I think it's in one of our YouTube comments a couple of days ago at the weigh-in or something like that, said, yeah, it was a comment on Eddie Hearn's interview that he did with Radio Rahim. And he said something like, Eddie Hearn, this fight is 50-50 or something like that. Or, yeah, no, that was it. My fight is in danger or something like that. And then saying, oh, yeah, but people talk about not making the fight and seniors criticising it and stuff. So, yeah, it was a bit of a talking out of both sides of his mouth, I think was the point. Thunder Road says rematches aren't done for the fans, unfortunately. It's all about the money. Heck, there was Yard Arthur 3 as chief support. Who wanted that rubbish? We will be discussing that rubbish in due course. And it wasn't rubbish for the last 3 rounds, I've got to say. I actually thought it was a decent fight for the last 3 rounds. Take Me Back, Pirate Radio Archive says Eddie can't accept defeat. It bothers him and he wants easy cash to stretch and milk it. The Stuff says, do you think the reconciliation was a spur of the moment thing or was pre-planned from the very beginning, fight announcement time? No, not fight announcement time, but I think in the build-up. I think once Senior started being very vocal about the fight not happening and him not wanting it, I think that's when you knew that they'd come together. Comics and Sneakers says Chris sells the fight, not Ben. Yeah, but how does Chris sell Ben's side of it? You know, Chris will feel that he won, you know, fairly, of course, because he got his hand raised. How's he going to make it seem like Ben's got a chance in the rematch? Thunder Road says maybe the MC was a Crystal Palace supporter still on the moon from a Wembley semi-final win and didn't want to say Brighton. Take Me Back says Turk Al Milkshake, he's called him here. To be fair, we came up with much better puns around a year ago and it didn't do us any good. So I'd probably rein that in if I was you. He wants to rematch in Saudi, probably, he says. Pelusi Ozdemir says the weight discrepancy was too much. Chris Eubank Jr. had an unfair advantage. It's not unfair, though, is it? If Conor Benn wanted the fight, it would have been a lot more unfair to make Eubank Jr. try and make welterweight, wouldn't it? Ed Hitchens says, I think the story is how we see boxing on both sides of the Atlantic. 2 domestic level fighters in the UK can sell out 70k, meanwhile North American boxers can barely sell out MSG. We're talking about that MSG show at the end of segment 4. The Stuff says seconds out, second to none. Thank you. Sasha English doesn't want to see it again. Not seconds out, but Eubank Jr. against Ben. Ed Hitchens says greetings from Canada. What about it, Ed? Al Cuerpo Boxing says no rematch needed. Eubank Jr. proved his win with many obstacles ahead. A rematch should not be immediate. Funny enough, Eubank Jr. was always the A side. Jim Smith says not in Saudi. A fight like that deserves a crowd. And Mickey Dubb says, I hope British boxing don't drift into the YouTube route where any fall with a following can step into the ring. Vidal Riley put on a fair show, but at least he can box, but it's all about the cash. Yeah, maybe we'll start there when we talk about the undercard on Saturday night, which we're going to do now. So, Modfather Vinny, if you can hear me, whack up the inspired headline number 2. So first of all, talking about the undercard, I've got to get this out of the way because otherwise I'm going to cop some stick at home. But my girlfriend and I had our predictions for the undercard, only 4 fights on the undercard, of course. And we agreed on all of them, which were all correct, by the way, except one, which was Aaron McKenna putting on an incredible performance, it has to be said, to defeat Liam Beefy Smith. Now, one of us went for Liam Beefy Smith, who was a big favourite with the Sky Sports viewers, it seemed, and with the bookies. And that one was me. Liam Beefy Smith, I can't believe he let me down. I should point out that my partner about 6 weeks ago had a photo taken at a boxing show with Liam Beefy Smith. So she incredibly betrayed him in picking Aaron McKenna in the first place. But with a slice of cheesecake from Pizza Express on the line, and it did look good. Unfortunately for me, Aaron McKenna pulled it out of the bag, and not the cheesecake, but the victory, and was able to defeat Beefy Smith. In fact, the fight wasn't even close. And there's been talk since on social media of Smith perhaps retiring at this point. So, Josh, first of all, what did you make of Smith against McKenna?
I just thought it was pure dominance from Aaron McKenna. Going into the fight, I was looking at it and I was like, this fight, that was the fight I found hardest to call and make a prediction on out of every single one, because we didn't really know what we were getting with Liam Smith. We didn't know how much he had left, but there was just so many question marks there on McKenna. And a name like Liam Smith was a huge step from what he'd been facing before. So I really don't know. And I think in the end, I ended up leaning towards Liam Smith. And I was thinking Liam Smith might old man him, use his experience, maybe get him out there late. But Aaron McKenna was just simply far too good, kind of following the headline theme, really, of just simply the better one. So, yeah, I'm not going to say I was disappointed, because Liam Smith did show a lot of heart in there to stick in there, especially getting dropped late with that body shot in the 12th and early on in the 12th. It would have been very easy for him just to say, you know what, I've already lost this fight. Let's just avoid taking the damage. But he stayed in there. He showed his heart, regardless of whether you were impressed or not by Liam Smith. We still know that he's got that grit and determination to keep going. I don't really know where he goes from here. As for Aaron McKenna, he's let the middleweight division know who he is now. He's going to be a known name. And we saw a great clip of Joe McNally, Liam Smith's trainer, go into the dressing room after to Aaron McKenna and say, you know, he's passed the baton on to you, went over to his trainer and said, guide him, but the right way. So who knows how far off Aaron McKenna is from world level, but it was a statement performance from Aaron McKenna, really.
Yeah, I thought his was one of the best performances of the night. Him or Vidal Riley, who we'll talk about in due course. And someone's already mentioned on the chat. I'm going to go back to the chat in a minute, but it's got to be difficult for Liam Smith now. I actually think McKenna probably could have got him out of there if he'd have gone, full tilt in round sort of 8, 9, 10, when Beefy had bloody mask across his face and just looked laboured and knackered. And he never would have given up. But I just think what impressed me a lot about his performance of a whole, McKenna, was his discipline. He never really traded for too long. He never gave any sort of leeway, any sort of chink of light to Liam Smith to come back into the fight. I think that was the only reason that stopped him from going all out in the last few rounds. He may have forced a stoppage, but I thought all round it was a mature performance, well beyond his years. And for Liam Smith now, previously he'd lost to Chris Eubank Jr, who he'd beaten in the past, so 1-1, and he'd lost only apart from that to Canelo and Jaime Munguia, who are both world-class fighters, former world champions like Liam himself. Now he's lost to, you'd have to say, a contender. I don't think it'd be fair to say a prospect, but a contender on the way up who hasn't yet won a world title. And it did seem like age, conditioning, size, because obviously Liam Smith won his title at 154. This was a middleweight fight, and Beefy didn't look the bigger man in there. And his punches didn't seem to have a devastating effect on McKenna on the rare occasions when he did land. He's got to be considering his future now. I mean, he's had an incredible career. He's had big fights. He's had a world title. He's probably done a lot better than he thought, because I know he didn't have the same amateur background as his brothers. And as a professional, he's, exceeded the achievements of at least two of them, if not all of them. Callum's obviously still fighting and has been a world champion. He could yet win another title at another weight. So certainly no shame in knocking it on the head now, given his age and what he's already achieved. But we wish him all the best either way. It's not like when I talk about Joe Joyce, I'm like, oh, he really needs to pack it in. If Liam Smith wants to try and reignite his career, perhaps at a lower level than Aaron McKenna, just to kind of get the confidence back and get the momentum going, I'd have no issue with that. But would he want to do that, having tasted mostly big fights for the past 5 to 10 years? Am I boring you, Josh?
No, sorry. No, not at all. It's fine. I couldn't be seen there. I could not be seen.
Have you been on the piss celebrating Liverpool's title?
Far from it, actually. Far from it. I'm not a Liverpool fan, am I?
We caught Josh in the middle of a yawn there. We'll just go to the chat and then we'll get on to another of the undercard fights. So where are we? Take Me Back agrees with Mickey Dub about not going down the YouTube route. Zombanu Love says, do you think Ben is now a national hero? Should a showing of bravery, should arguably be a given for pro fighters getting millions, mean all his wrongdoings are forgiven? I mean, it's an interesting question because Frank Bruno was a British hero long before he actually won a world title. He was a hero more for his defeats and how he conducted himself away from that. I don't think a showing of bravery, even on the grandest stage, should mean all your wrongdoings are forgotten. But I think Ben will definitely be more liked than he was before the fight. I think, you know, myself and my partner, who both felt that Eubank was going to win, said at the end, wow, I didn't think Conor Benn had that in him. You know, and neither did Chris Eubank Jr. So I think he's earned a lot of people's respect. I don't think that means that any mistakes he's made in the past, whether you are talking about the failed drug test, which, you know, he would still dispute, or the, you know, relations with fans and media and attitude and that kind of thing. I don't think that should all be forgotten, but I think he will be a much more, much more liked and revered fighter now than he was in the build-up. El Cuerpo Boxing says, Aaron McKenna looked great young switch hitter. JDM says, our country is the prime hotspot for that YouTube boxing garbage. To Mickey. Where else? Westy M says, I was there. I didn't rate the undercard, but the main fight was absolutely brilliant. I'd love to see it again, as I thought it was a lot closer than the scorecard said. Barney Love says, where do we think Liam not yet announced injury will be? Ankle, back or shoulder? That's a bit harsh, Zambanu Love. I mean, certainly was no evidence of an injury on the night, and I know you're referring to what happened in the Eubank rematch, but, you know, oh, and I missed out one of Liam's defeats, I should have said as well, to Magomed Kurbanov, which most people felt he should have won. So that's why I didn't mention it or forgot it. Jim Smith says McKenna looked good. Yard versus Lyndon Arthur was Zeds, so sleep inducing. Nat says McKenna was great, as was the cheesecake. Better still was the victory. Yeah, I assume you mean your victory rather than McKenna's. Al Cuerpo Boxing says McKenna rose to the occasion. However, Beefy wasn't throwing enough early, which was odd. Timid punches. Yeah, but Beefy normally starts slow and gets his measure and then cranks the pressure up throughout the fight. I didn't think that was the shocker. Thunder Road says Beefy got tenderized. Oh, God. How long have you been sitting on that, Thunder Road? At least 48 hours, almost. Mickey Dub says Smith really hasn't any more to prove. El Cuerpo says McKenna versus Ammo Williams. Guys like Adames or Janibek are too much for McKenna now. Yeah, I think that's a decent shout. McKenna against Ammo Williams. Who else? What about McKenna against Hamza Shiraz? Oh, no, he's moved up to super middle now, hasn't he? It's a shame. Jim Smith says Guna's going to win the Champions League. All right, good luck with that. Take Me Back says, Danny, do you think Eubank Jr. should fight Billy Joe Saunders in a revenge match? What weight would it be? Because Saunders is nowhere near, from looking at the footage of him from Saturday night, he's nowhere near super middle, is he? I mean, if Saunders can get back into any sort of shape, as he's been threatening to do for 2 years now, and get back into the ring and actually fight someone, get his license back, all of that, a lot of ifs. But yeah, I'd like to see it. If Billy Joe Saunders could have a warm-up fight first, and we could and not against Eubank's manager, we could see that he's actually got some of that skill and talent and ability left, then yeah. Jim Smith says Ben is halfway forgiven in his eyes. Jim, what would it take to make him all the way forgiven, or do I not want to know on this family show? Take Me Back says Billy Joe wants it, but I think he'll struggle to make the weight. Well, yeah. Al Cuerpo says Ben Shalom should make an offer to Badu Jack for Chris Billum Smith. That's if Badu Jack gets through Saturday night against Noel McCallion. We shall wait and see, and we'll be talking about that in a bit. And Take Me Back says Hamza versus Eubank seems more likely. I mean, Frank Warren's always insisted that both Eubank Jr., but both Hamza Shiraz and Denzel Bentley, his two middleweights at the time, but now Hamza's moved up, could both beat Eubank Jr. So we shall see. But yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing that at super middle. I'd probably just about favour Hamza in that, but it's a tough one actually, because it's so hard to know how much Eubank's got left and how much of his performance was down to the weight. So him at super middle is really a mystery at the moment. Jim Smith says, I don't just forgive a fighter that's cheated twice because he fought bravely in one fight. Did he cheat twice, or was it simply 2 drug test fails that came back? I mean, we're not saying he intentionally cheated at all, of course, but 2 drug test failures doesn't mean he cheated on 2 separate occasions. It just means it came up on 2 separate tests. Thunder Road says to Jim Smith, Declan Rice was at the Eubank fight Saturday, up the Arsenal. He was. So was Marcus Rashford, wasn't he? I liked it that Andy Clark was commentating for Sky Sports and the camera dwelled on Ashley Walters. And Andy Clark didn't immediately know who it was, I don't think. And you could hear Tasha Jonas off mic going, Asher D, coming to Andy Clark's rescue, but also using his So Solid crew name, not Andy's, Ashley Walters, from so long ago. So I'm not sure how up to date she is on Ashley's career either. Where are we? Zambanu Love says, thoughts on BJS calling Napa rubber lips and broadcasters cutting that from their clips without commenting on it. Well, I didn't see it. I didn't see him say that. So I don't disbelieve you, but if he said that, obviously that's bang out of order and he should apologise immediately. Certainly wouldn't shock me, though, knowing the people involved as I do. But yeah, I haven't seen it, so I can't say for sure what he said. Westy M says, I think they're call for a rematch. There's too much money not to, in my opinion. Jim Smith's having a go at me for semantics. He failed 2 tests. That's not cheating twice, though, is it? Even if he cheated at all. Take Me Back says, no way to Zambanu Love. And Anthony Ward, I'm not sure what any of this is about. So yeah, let's move on. What was your next favourite fight on the undercard, Josh?
Ooh. First fight, the opener, Bilham Smith, Brandon Glanton. That was my number 2. I thought do you know what? I was really impressed with Glanton to start out with. There was a point, I think, probably in the 3rd or 4th, where I started to think Glanton might actually be on his way to getting Bilham Smith out of here. But we know how tough Bilham Smith is, and the recovery that he's shown was just exceptional. Really turned it around, got back on top, and a deserved winner on the night. Good to see the respect between the two as well. I think that was something that was nice to see squashed, especially after some not so positive comments made by Brandon Glanton earlier in the week. Yeah, I just thought that fight was really good. I really liked the up close sitting on the chest action from Glanton. Bilham Smith responding with the big shots where he could. I thought that fight delivered him. And then it's a shame that was the opener, really. It was in front of barely any fans, and it ended up being like a really good matchup on paper, especially when you look at some of the other fights later on in the night that could have been good, but just lacked that bit of excitement. Bilham Smith and Brandon Glanton, they had the excitement. So if I had to give a fight of the night to the undercard, it would be to them. I think they had stole the show until the main event walked out.
It was all right. There was a bit much wrestling and clinching for me, even though I'm a wrestling fan. I thought once it became clear that neither had the power to knock the other one out, or at least their chins were too good for that to happen, then it became a little bit monotonous, a little bit samey. You know, they kind of settled in, knew they were going to the end, and Chris Bilham Smith had a bit more variety, a bit more talent, and just more conditioning. I think over the 12 rounds, he had that championship experience, and fair play to him. But it's not the sort of performance, and this isn't a major criticism of Bilham Smith because he got the job done. I think that's incredibly important. But it's not the sort of performance that's going to nail him down another big fight against the Badu Jack, Noel Mikhalian, or whoever. There was a mention of Jai Opataya at one point. I definitely don't want to see that for Bilham Smith at the moment. So that's the thing. And I'm surprised that Shane McGuigan hasn't got hair as grey as mine by now, because all these Chris Bilham Smith fights, he takes far too many heavy shots and he tends to cut as well more recently. And I think he's a good enough boxer, seasoned enough and talented enough to not get involved in those sort of grueling firefights on such a regular basis. Zerdo was a bit too slick, a bit too quick, and I can understand that. Zerdo's one of the best, if not the best, cruiserweight in the world. But against someone like Brandon Glanton, who wasn't on the same level as Bilham Smith in terms of ability and experience, I think, you've got to step off a lot more. You've got to mix things up, move laterally. And Bilham Smith did try and do a lot of that right at the start, but quickly got drawn into the sort of fight that doesn't really suit him. Not against that opposition anyway. So I'd like to see him have another one before he goes in to try and regain a version of the world title and maybe just correct some of the mistakes that he'll know he made as well in that fight. We've had a lot of criticism, we've seen a lot of criticism of the trilogy fight, the trilogy that no one wanted. It's been dubbed between, I'm sure Lyndon Arthur wanted it, between Anthony Yarde and Lyndon Arthur. And I've got to say, Arthur did put on a better performance than he did in the rematch, where Yarde just basically ran out and destroyed him. The first fight was obviously very close, pretty boring, like the third one. And Yarde won on points. They were saying, oh, he just won with his jab. It seemed at first like he was planning to do the same thing this time around, and he certainly had the better of the tedious first 6 to 8 rounds. But Yarde came on strong from halfway, used his physical strength, balled Lyndon Arthur back to the ropes and into the corners. And although Lyndon Arthur almost gave as good as he got once he was tucked in those areas, Yarde did have the better of it. You know, he loves the uppercuts and the hooks at close range, and he was able to get over the line. But it was far from easy, and as most people have commented already, far from pleasing on the eye for the most part. But I found the last 3 or 4 rounds were actually quite gripping, because I felt about round 9, something like that, when it turned, I felt that Arthur was the one slightly ahead. So there was a kind of doubt about who would come out with a victory until Yarde kind of bulldozed his way across the finish line. Josh, before we go to the chat again, what did you make of it? And were you disappointed, or were you expecting it to be tedious?
I was kind of expecting Anthony Yarde to go through, and to be honest, I was just thinking about the fight, and obviously I wasn't sure on where Lyndon Arthur was going into. I didn't know what the desire was, whereas Anthony Yarde still has that desire, and there's more for Anthony Yarde in the light heavyweight division than what there is for Lyndon Arthur. If Lyndon Arthur had won, I think it would have been very hard for him to get another fight of that type of magnitude. Whereas for Anthony Yarde, there's always been the talk of a Joshua Buatsi fight, which I think is probably more there than ever now. Especially Buatsi's going to be looking to bounce back off a defeat. Could we possibly look at targeting that fight? Maybe. Yeah, I expected Anthony Yarde to just go through him and make a statement and stop him inside 6 rounds, but Arthur shocked me with how much he actually wanted it. I kind of thought, oh, is he maybe here for the payday? But no, he was there to win. He was there to get himself back up and climb the ladder of the light heavyweight division. But it was a good matchup in terms of the competitiveness. I just think it lacked that excitement and gripping factor to it, which is what, you know, the fans are here for. We're here to be entertained at times, and I just think it lacked that entertainment. Late on, yeah, it got a little bit more exciting just because we thought Arthur was winning the fight, but I think it's a fight that, you know, when you talk about trilogies that are just pointless, I feel like that was a trilogy that really didn't need to be made. No one really was asking for it. Kind of similar to Fury Chisora 3, where it kind of just came out of nowhere, but we were just like, oh, that's an interesting one to make. So, yeah, I mean, fair enough. It was a decent watch. It was a decent watch, but I don't think it's a fight in 30 years' time I'm going to be saying, oh, do you remember watching Anthony Yarde versus Lyndon Arthur 3 before Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. 4? I don't think I'll be recollecting that fight again anytime soon.
And there's one fight left on the undercard, which I've got a few things to say about. But before we get to that, let's just quickly go back to the chat. Mickey Dub says the UK public can be very unforgiving with certain fighters, especially if they have a lot of mouth and can't back it up. Just so people know, we're talking about the undercard now, but we have been talking previously about Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn, excellent main event. And we've asked you in the polls, you can still vote, should a rematch between the two of them be next? Let us know. Simple yes or no. And do give us a like and a subscribe while you're there if you haven't already. Jim Smith says, Conor Benn cheated, mate. Have a laugh. Listen, cheating implies intent. And I don't think legally we can say he intentionally cheated unless we want to get sued, whether we believe it or not. Zambanu Love says, Billy Joe Saunders called Eubank's manager rubber lips after getting mugged off, so it didn't have the effect he desired. Yeah, again, I mean, I haven't seen him use those words, but maybe I'll go back and look. Take Me Back says, Ashley Walters called Anthony Yarde Anthony Ward. Oh, not Top Boy anymore, to Shane. That's all I can say. Or Asher D, Tasha. Maybe that's why. Maybe it's like Asher D, Tasha J. Maybe that's all she's got in her head now. Where are we? Jim Smith says, Big Geezer at CBS. Wouldn't want any of him one-on-one. I mean, I don't think you're being considered for his next opponent, Jim. But yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us would we? Take Me Back says, I don't understand why that Yard fight happened. He needs to be fighting for titles, even though the levels are higher and he'd find it difficult. I think hadn't he been inactive for ages, and then he went back to Frank Warren after some promotional difficulties. They probably wanted to give him a fight that he felt confident he could win before moving on to another world title fight or similar. Thunder Road says, Danny, I'm currently listening to Big Pun's Capital Punishment album. I know Josh hadn't been born, but has he heard of or listened to Big Pun before? Josh?
Unfortunately, I have not. No,
But it might not be unfortunate. You don't know. You might think he's rubbish.
I know, but I feel like Thunder Road's going to be really disappointed now that I've said that I've never heard of Big Pun. So after this live, when I go make my dinner, I'll put a bit of Big Pun on and see. We'll come back next week with my ratings.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, Thunder Road on Seconds Out's behalf. Mickey Dubb says Joshua Buatsi and Yard is the only fight people really want to see. It should have happened 2 years ago. What about Buatsi against Callum Smith as Callum Smith beat? Sorry, not Buatsi. Anthony Yard against Callum Smith as Callum Smith beaten Buatsi. You know, wouldn't we want to see that? Jim Smith's laughing, and that's it for the chat for the minute. So the one remaining undercard fight was Vidal Riley challenging for the British title, cruiserweight title, held by Chev Clark, former Olympian, of course. And it was a fight that many of us, including me, obviously, as I said, us, felt would be the fight of the night. I just thought styles would mesh well. They're both ambitious, you know, early in their career, although not young necessarily, particularly in Chev's case. And for the British title, Chev had come off a split decision defeat for the European, so it showed he was at a good level and had beaten Ellis Zorro for that British title initially. Vidal Riley, unbeaten, and won the English title, came in as the reigning English champion. And I just thought not enough had been said about that fight in the build-up. I thought it had been largely ignored, which I thought was crazy because Vidal Riley is known predominantly, even though he was a good amateur, I know he'd be the first to correct me. He was a good amateur and he has been a boxer before he was an influencer, but he is known predominantly as an influencer for training KSI and so on in that sphere. And a lot of his fame, if you like, has come from that. Whereas you've got Chev Clark, who's gone the traditional route. He was a long-time GB amateur, perhaps too long. Went to all the major championships, medalled at some of them. Olympian, great guy as well. But they both reached the same point, but from two very different routes. And I thought there was a lot that you could talk about that, but you never saw any comments really from, you know, Vidal talking about why he didn't get on GB, even though he could have when he was an amateur. And I think we've got an interview of him talking about that from a few years ago. Or about Chev Clark talking about his view on the influencer scene, which, you know, Vidal was part of, maybe still is a little bit. And the fact that, you know, he was suggested to fight Jake Paul at one point by Eddie Hearn. So there was lots of kind of narratives, interesting ones as well, going into that fight that no one really talked about. It just seemed like the main event took up so much of the spotlight. There was none left for maybe some of the undercard fights. But this was certainly the one that was most intriguing for me, which obviously meant I found it a massive disappointment as it played out in the ring. Chev Clark didn't mix it up enough, didn't let his hands go enough, and just seemed like he didn't really want to be there after round 8. And that's not questioning his heart or his guts. I know he's got both of those in abundance, but maybe he just realised that it wasn't going to be his night and kind of coasted to the end. I'm not sure. As for Vidal Riley, I have to say, given he was the one thought to be the less technically gifted, the less decorated amateur, certainly, he put on a very, very skillful and impressive performance. He moved laterally really well. He kept sticking his jab out and his right hand, his lead right hand, to stop Chev getting set. So he had to keep readjusting. I thought that was really smart. Obviously, he's got Derek, his dad, in his corner. They had a great game plan. And he never looked overly troubled. If you had to say which one of them was the seasoned, you know, long-term boxer, rather than the one who, you know, only fought English level and hadn't been an international level amateur, you'd say it was Vidal Riley. You'd say it was Chev Clark, because Vidal Riley put on a very mature, very efficient, just very composed performance. And now I think you turn to whether, obviously, Vidal Riley can go onwards and upwards. He'll maybe look at fighting the European champion who beat Chev in the previous fight. But for Clark, it's a very difficult one because he loved the amateurs. He loved the GB setup. He was always really happy when he was there. You know, I interviewed him a number of times there. He medalled at loads of major championships, but he got to a certain age where he wasn't going to medal at the Olympics. And he knew that if he was ever going to turn pro, it had to be when he did, because otherwise he would leave it too late. So he did. But now he's had 2 defeats in 10 or 11 fights, albeit at a good level. He's won a British title, which a lot of fighters never do. And it wouldn't surprise me because the impression I get very much from Chev, either outright or subtly, is that he's not a big fan of the politics and of the selling yourself side in professional boxing. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he decided to knock it on the head after only a small number of fights. Not because he doesn't think he can go any further, but because he's had those 2 defeats back to back and probably thinks, do you know what? I never wanted to turn pro in the first place, particularly. And now I might as well go and do something I'm going to enjoy more. And that might be joining the amateur setup back at GB. Who knows? He could be a great benefit to the Olympians and the international amateurs of the future. Obviously, only he can make that decision. But just knowing him as I've got to over the past few years, that wouldn't surprise me at all. Josh, what was your reflection on that fight?
Again, like many people, thought it was going to be the fight of the night. You know, it was a really intriguing matchup on paper. I had a really bad night for my predictions on Saturday. I think I didn't get a single one right. I was really bad night at the office. I thought Chev Clark would use his experience from the amateurs and also fighting at the higher level as a professional. I thought that had all come down to be too much for Vidal Riley. I was really torn on whether he'd stop him or get him on points. But I was very confident saying Chev was going to win. And the only thing I could say to maybe defend Chev here with his performance was there was issues with that ring canvas. I think it's something that needs to be looked at.
I can't believe we haven't mentioned it.
I know it's come down to like nearly the final segment, and we've only just brought it up. It was like boxing on an ice rink at times for the fighters. I don't know if it got fixed later on because we didn't see as many slips later on in the card. But for Vidal and for Chev, it was like boxing on ice. And for Chev's style, he's someone that likes to apply that pressure, move his feet a bit more, and sit on your chest. Obviously, don't get me wrong, I'm sure Vidal would have had a way to make that not happen for Chev. But I don't know. I think the ring might have had a bit more to play than what we thought. You know, it was a big talking point on Twitter in that fight mainly. So, yeah, I don't know. And you make a good point as to where does Chev go from here. He put a video out on his Instagram last night that I'd seen. He said that he will be back and he will come back. And what level he comes back at, I'm not too sure. Because I feel he's above that English level. I think he's much way above the English level. And proved he can compete at that European level against Mosquera in what was I'm not going to say highly, but a bit of a controversial defeat for him. So it's an interesting one. As for Vidal, he's proven people wrong. When he first came into the pro scene, he started off under Mayweather Promotions before getting into the influencer scene. Became a big factor of that influencer scene, coaching KSI and stopped boxing for a bit. But the way I see it is, it was great for his profile because the second he was done with coaching YouTubers and he said he's coming back to pro boxing, he was snapped up straight away by Sky and Ben Shalom. So good for the profile when he's got the amateur pedigree and he's got the skills to back it. And whether he goes to Moscow, I'm trying to think domestically, is there any big domestic fights he could make possibly at Cruiser? I've seen people suggest possibly Vidal Riley versus Chris Smith. I mean, I don't know. Do you take that fight straight away for Vidal, or do you reckon you hold back on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I can't see Chris Smith wanting that fight. I know both have got a relationship with Boxer, and they did ask Vidal about it in the pre-fight interview. I think it was I can't remember the lady's name, the lady interviewer with the tattoo on her neck like Cody Rhodes. But yeah, she asked him about, do you want to get closer to the kind of cruiserweights that are sharing the bill with you? And he said, well, we'll talk about that after. I'm only focusing on this fight, which is the thing he should say. But yeah, I mean, I can't see why Chris Smith would want that fight. He's knocking on the door for another world title shot. What's he got to gain by beating Vidal Riley? He's only risking defeat, isn't he?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Yeah, that's all I've really got to say on that one. I was a bit let down by it, really. I thought, like the most of us, just let down. Thought it was going to be a bit of a firefight, and it was a bit of a snoozer, really.
I'm sure both Chev and Vidal are devastated to have let us both down, Josh, to be honest. But I'll ask them if I happen to see them, although you're likely to see them before I do. Take Me Back says Big Pun is decent. The Stuff says, have you guys discussed Fury's recent teaser video? No, because when I put out the subjects or the segments for the live, the video hadn't been released yet. But this is basically Tyson Fury back in the gym, not on his own though, with Sugar Hill Stewart. So everyone's now saying, well, it's going to be a comeback announced soon enough, him against Joshua and so on and so forth. Maybe we'll talk about that a bit more if more stuff has been revealed by next week's episode. Take Me Back says Yard should be fighting Joe Smith Jr. then waiting to get a shot at Bivol or Benavidez. Has Joe Smith Jr. fought recently? Otherwise, what's it all for? I know it's easier said than done, but surely that's what you should be going for. Well, yeah, and I'm sure that's what Yard wants, but having been inactive for a while, had promotional difficulties, I'm sure he just wanted to get back in the ring, shed some of the rust. Jim Smith says Benavidez would massacre Yard. Daddy Dave, David Hyde says, late to the party, any mention of cheesecake? Yeah, you've missed it, Dave. You'll have to watch it on playback. But yeah, I went into great detail about how I got cheated out of a cheesecake or a slice of cheesecake. Or actually just a slice. It wasn't called a cheesecake on the menu. It's just called a slice. I don't know why I do that every time I say slice. Take Me Back says he agrees about Benavidez massacring Yard, but do you agree he should fight for titles? And Jim Smith says, I'm not sure he deserves it. So those two are just going back and forth on their own, like Stadler and Waldorf from The Muppet Show. Let them crack on. Mickey Dub says, who was the short guy who kept holding that ring belt at the weigh-ins? I don't know. Josh, do you know?
Rick Reno. I think it was Rick Reno.
Oh,
the
right.
one who did the...
I've never met him. I've only ever spoken to him.
He did the big speech at the beginning of the press conference, didn't he? Where he basically just ripped into promoters saying that they're putting on not so great cards in the ring. I can't fully remember it, but we've got a little clip of it. I think I've got a little clip of it on my laptop of Rick just going on like a 5-minute rant at the start of the press conference, and he was the one holding the belt between them. You would have thought every fight on the card was for the Ring Magazine title because it was just in the middle at every single fight.
Now, we talked about Cheesecake Gate, so just before we move on to segment 3, I feel like I should bring up Ed Sheeran Gate as well. So when we were watching the boxing on Saturday night, my partner kept saying, is that Ed Sheeran? Is that Ed Sheeran? There was someone in the crowd behind one of the ring posts. And I said, I don't know. And then every time I looked, the camera angle would change, so I couldn't see. And she said, oh, do you know what? I don't think it is Ed Sheeran. I think it's just some old lady who looks like Ed Sheeran. So I said, oh, fair enough. Okay, I don't need to look now. And then he got in the ring at the end of round, I don't know, 3 or 4 of the Billam Smith fight and paraded the card around. Didn't make the best ring card girl. I said, oh, look, that's the one you were talking about. Went, oh, it is Ed Sheeran. It is Ed Sheeran. And then I had to wait for Andy Clark to say, yeah, so we've got a lot of lookalikes here tonight, including wannabe Ed Sheeran's David Beckham, which looked nothing like David Beckham, and a couple of others. So it went from Ed Sheeran to old lady to Ed Sheeran lookalike. I just wanted to get that out there because I might have lost the cheesecake, but Ed Sheeran Gate will never be forgotten. Jim Smith says that Ed Sheeran was brilliant. Well, he's better than the David Beckham, that's for sure. And Nikki the Fourth says, yeah, it's Rick Reno. He's been a journo for Ring Magazine for over a decade. Has it been over a decade? He was the owner of Boxing Scene for many years, and Boxing Scene have got their own axe to grind with Saturday Night Show, as many of you will know. But we haven't got time to talk about that, unfortunately. So we will move on now to segment 3. And a huge fight. It was expected to be announced soon, and it was announced last night. The press conference is tomorrow in London, and Josh will be attending alongside Modfather Vinny, because Modfather Frank is currently in New York, which we'll be talking about in segment 4, not Frank specifically. And Radio Raheem is in New York with him, and Ayman Khan is in Saudi Arabia for the Canelo show. So, yeah, we've got Josh Hart gets one of the biggest press conferences of his life. And obviously, as many of you know, he hasn't been born long, but that's still quite a big thing to say. Josh, it was announced last night, Olekdandr Usyk defending his titles and going for the IBF belt of Daniel Dubois in their rematch in July. How excited are you about this fight?
I'm excited. I'm not as excited for it as I have been with other fights. Like, you know, when we get the announcements of, like, you know, when Eubank Ben was announced for the set, obviously, to take place at Tottenham this year. Usyk Dubois too, I don't quite have that same interest, just based on the fact that we kind of feel we know who's going to win, but at the same time, I give Dubois a huge chance going into this one, and I would not be all that shocked if Dubois was to beat Usyk this time. I see Dubois starting quick, similar to how he did against AJ, and I don't know. Father time doesn't wait for anyone. It's the cliche saying. I think I've still got a long time till Father time catches me. Thank the Lord. But I think for Usyk, it is really creeping up on him, and Dubois really could get to him this time. I don't know. I think the big debate for what the build is going to be is, does it actually sell out Wembley? Does Usyk Dubois 2 have the potential? Is that a fight that probably should have went to Tottenham?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, Eubank Ben, everyone's heard the names. Everyone knows the beef. Everyone knows the drug test and the aborted fight from a couple of years ago. I think that was a no-brainer to put that in the stadium. I think this one's a lot more kind of on the cusp.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll see when tickets go on sale, won't we? You know, things are worth what people are willing to pay for them. So we shall see. And even if it does sell out, people will say it's because of the secondary market anyway. I know. I've seen this movie. Jim Smith says Usyk is silly for carrying on. And the stuff says, can we all just agree, please, that was not a low blow? Oh, we're not talking about the low blow thing again. We've done it for ages now. David Hyde says, are you having a pop at my baby? Daddy Dave, I would never, not when you're in earshot anyway, or view shot, or whatever this might be. But yeah, getting back to that, I think Usyk is not a massive draw. He's a great fighter. He's the pound for pound number one for many people. Probably for me as well. And Dubois is growing in stature, especially since beating Anthony Joshua. That would have won him a lot of new fans and fame. But I'm not sure they're quite there yet. I know they're trying to sell the rematch on the controversy of the first fight and Dubois' form since. But I think it's still, to a large extent, a boxing connoisseur, a boxing aficionados fight, rather than one that crosses over to the casual audience. I think the vast majority of people, especially switched on boxing people, believe that Usyk's going to win again. And although Dubois has undoubtedly improved and got some big name scalps since their first fight, Usyk doesn't seem to have diminished in any way. And I think he would probably need to. And I've said this on the pod before because it got made into a clip out. I don't think Dubois will ever beat Usyk. I don't think Usyk will carry on long enough or decline enough within his career for that to happen. But that's just my thoughts. Josh, what do you think? Do you give Dubois, how much chance? What percentage chance do you give Dubois?
I'm going to go different to the bookmakers because I've already had a look at the odds, and they are very heavy in the favour of Olekdandr Usyk. I'm not going to say 50-50. I'm going to say maybe a 60-40. I think there's a lot more danger this time for Olekdandr Usyk than what there was going into that first fight. I don't remember the hype being all that much the first time round when they fought. Obviously, it's going to grow a lot more now, given the fact that Dubois has gone on a sensational run since that first fight, beating Jerome Miller, Filip Hrgović, and Anthony Joshua. But there's just not that name value to it. So I can't see it being the most hyped up fight. However, I do think if Dubois wins, we've got our new heavyweight star for the UK. It would be some feat for him to take out Olekdandr Usyk, regardless of how old he is. He's still there now. He's still dominating. While he is getting older, and the big talk of father time, and Usyk's even said he's only got one or two more. A win for Daniel Dubois. Beating Olekdandr Usyk at any stage of his career at this point is going to be massive for whoever's career it is. So when we're at a point where I do think we are losing our stars, and our stars right now are retiring, and we're needing that someone to step up, I think Daniel Dubois could make himself that man come the end of July 19th if all goes his way.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm glad half of this presenting team is giving him a good chance. Tyler Mee says Usyk is going to be the GOAT, beats everyone. Thunder Road says, I'm still only seeing less than 20 likes. If you haven't already, take a look and give a thumbs up before the live ends. Still got another segment and a bit yet, Thunder Road. But yes, please do give us a thumbs up and vote in the poll if you haven't already. We've asked, should Eubank Jr. Conor Benn rematch be next for both men? The stuff says the recent video of Usyk and Dubois facing each other, that push was fake. Zambanu Love, Dubois quitting off the jab should be more a talking point than the low blow. Mickey Dub, Parker versus Usyk would be, for me, a more interesting fight. Yeah, so the quitting off the jab thing in the fight with Usyk, I think that reminded me more of, was it Anthony Yard against Kovalev, where the finishing punch was a jab?
Yeah.
And it wasn't that the jab was particularly good or that he quit off a jab, quote unquote. It was more, in both cases, the fact that the loser of the fight was completely exhausted and knew that they were unable to turn the fight around. So it wasn't necessarily quitting. It was more just not having quite the same will and determination as they'd had earlier in the fight. And I'm not blaming any of them for that. You go and fight Kovalev. You go and fight Usyk. Fuck that. Is it fuck that for a game of soldiers? But yeah, getting back to the rematch, I've seen a lot of people saying that they don't feel that Dubois has improved technically. It's more that his confidence has grown because of the people he's beaten and the manner in which he's defeated them. And I see an argument for that, but I think Don Charles is a really good trainer. So I can't imagine there's no technical improvements at all. I felt his poise, his head movement, and his footwork were all better against Anthony Joshua than they had been in his previous fights. The way he set up the finishing punch, I mean, that was pretty impressive. So I do think he's got better. But if you say that Usyk's a 9 out of 10 heavyweight, and he'd be a 10 if he was a bigger guy, and you said Dubois for their first fight was a 7 at best, I would say. You look at the improvements he's made, the confidence has gone up. He's still probably only an 8. He'd be a 7.5, but he's a good size heavyweight. So you've got to say he's an 8. Usyk's a 9, and he's only not a 10 because of his size. There's not many areas. What are Dubois' best things? His power, his footwork. They're his 2 best qualities. Now, his power's heavier than Usyk's, no doubt. But his footwork, which is arguably his 2nd best quality, Usyk's is still much better. In pretty much every area apart from power and physical strength and size. And these matter. We saw with Eubank Jr., a lot of people thought it mattered there. But in every other area of boxing, Usyk is superior to Dubois. It's as simple as that. Even this version of Dubois may not have the potential to become a 9 or a 10. Very few fighters have. That's why they're elite fighters. Are we saying that Dubois now is as good as a peak AJ? I think that's a more interesting question, because a peak AJ still fell to Usyk twice, or a near peak AJ. Do we think Dubois has reached the level that AJ was at when he beat Klitschko? What do you think, Josh?
I think it's a very interesting point, first of all, before I can even think of an answer. I really don't know. It's a really tough one, because I still feel Dubois has so much to offer, whereas AJ, I would say that was more when I was just coming into boxing and everything. But say the question again, because you've really got my head in. This is a very interesting question. So, is Daniel Dubois at the same level as a peak Anthony Joshua at his peak?
Yeah. So the Anthony Joshua who beat Klitschko, which I think most people would say was around his peak, if you accept he's not his peak anymore, which I think you'd have to, is Dubois at that level now?
I don't think so. I think Dubois got more to offer still.
So you think he can get to that level, but he's just not there yet?
This is such a tough one. I don't think he's there yet, no. So, yeah, no, I don't think he is. I think he's still got... I think there's still a lot of improvement to come as well, and I think he already is quite good. But I just feel like there's something different with that Anthony Joshua. So, yeah, I'm going to say he's not quite there, but not too far off.
That's interesting. See, so maybe he could still get to a 9 or a 10 if he keeps improving. But then in that case, this fight's come too early for him and just early enough for Usyk. Right, we'll go through the chat and then we'll move on to segment 4, because we've kept you for an hour and a quarter already. We know Modfather Vinny's got some other fires to put out as well, so we'll try and zip through segment 4. But Zambanu Love says, Dubois has grafted for his last few wins, to be honest, has shown mental resilience. Take Me Back says, Triple D has got better, but Usyk has now fought him and sussed him out. Zambanu Love says, but he's become better in the traditional way, and that's bread and butter for Usyk. That's kind of what I was alluding to. Kelly Dunn says yes. I assume to Dubois being at the same level as PKJ. Jim Smith says Usyk will slow down. He's 38 and is playing a dangerous game. People have been saying that about Usyk for his last 4 fights at least. Zambani Love Dubois is still too basic like AJ. Jim Smith, peak Dubois would KO peak Joshua. We can disagree on that. Zambani Love, don't think Dubois can control a fight for 12 rounds like the Vlad Parker version of AJ. Yes, it is a bit of kind of experience, ring IQ in that sense, isn't it? Okay, so moving on to segment 4, fourth and final segment. There are a lot of fights taking place this weekend, which is why, as I mentioned earlier, we have drafted Ayman Khan out to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia for Canelo against Skull. And we've also sent Frank Trevitt, Modfather Frank, with Radio Raheem out to New York City for a fight that packs in, 3 kind of marquee attraction fights, although we can talk about how good we think those fights are shortly. But let's start with Canelo against Skull. Skull, who apparently, according to Nigel Benn, was given a bit of a pasting by Conor Benn leading up to the Eubank fight. He obviously, Skull denies it. And Conor Benn didn't endorse what his dad said. He was asked about it and he said, well, sparring, and left it at that. What do you think of this Canelo fight? Is it just a way to get him started with Riyadh season and then we'll get the real Canelo fights we want in May? Or is it more that Skull is being massively underrated going into this?
I think this is just a fight for Canelo to get started with Riyadh season. And out of every Riyadh season card I've seen so far, I think this is the one I've got the least interest in. And that's no disrespect. It's still a good card. There's still a lot of great fights on there, but just there's not that UK fight fan interest on there. I think the closest you get is Martin Bakody. Although I've seen Billy Nelson say that Richard Riakpor's supposedly on the card this weekend. I've not seen anyone else say it. I've not seen any other reports on it. But supposedly Riakpor's on the show. So, yeah. I don't really expect anything other than a routine Canelo win from Saturday night. I think Canelo beats him on points, just cruises his way through. I don't really see William Skull having much to offer that Canelo hasn't already seen in his career. So, yeah, I'd say it's more just one just for Canelo to get started. And then we'll see the bigger fights roll on in September and onwards from there for Canelo, I'd say.
Well, we wish Ayman Khan all the best out there, obviously. Plus, Billy Nelson and his 1 or 2 charges, depending on how many actually fight on the show. More of a balanced bill is the one that takes place in New York, which is probably why we've sent 2 people to that. 3 fights at the top of the card. Teofimo Lopez going up against Arnold Barboza Jr., who we saw recently defeat Jack Catterall, or fairly recently, over here. Which is an interesting fight in itself, but I guess the main interest outside the boxing hardcore would be for Ryan Garcia, who returns after a while out. We know why, after what happened with the drug test and Devin Haney fight. Haney's also on the bill, by the way, against Jose Ramirez. But yeah, the main interest, I guess, will be Ryan Garcia against Roddy Romero. 2 fighters stopped, I believe, by Tank Davis. What do you make of that fight? And is it the right fight for Ryan to return?
I think it's an interesting fight. I think it's a fight where, Ryan's a bit of a character, Rolly Romero's a bit of a character. It'll create for an interesting fight week. I believe it's for the WBA regular welterweight world title. I think I saw it on the WBA's. Pardon me. I saw it on their Twitter page, and they linked it to an article. And I believe the winner of this fight will become mandatory for boots between Garcia and Romero. So that adds a bit of intrigue to the fight. But no, I like that fight. I like the card itself. While it's only a 3-fight show, I'm interested by the spectacle of a show in Times Square. Quite jealous that Raheem got the call up instead of me. Thought I really had a chance this time getting out there, but there's always the next Times Square show if they ever go back. But no, I'm excited for that one. I've got more interest in that than Canelo. So yeah, I think Rolly versus Romero is the perfect fight. I think it's 2 notable enough names over in America for Garcia to remind everyone that he is back. I think a routine win there, and then seems it's the Devin Haney rematch in October. Whether I think that's going to be at welterweight as well. But yeah, I think it's a good comeback fight, and nothing more than that really.
Yeah, I agree. And Barboza Jr., that's an interesting one against Teofimo Lopez. I think that Teofimo tends to rise to the level of the opponent. I think Barboza showed enough in his last couple of fights that he could give him a stern test. I think Devin Haney is obviously angling for the rematch with Garcia. Jose Ramirez, the last fight I saw him in was against Barboza. He looked awful. I don't know if he's fought since. Maybe someone in the chat will tell me. But if that version of Jose Ramirez turns up, I don't give him much of a chance against Devin Haney. How interested are you, just before we round off and do the poll results, Josh, how interested are you in a rematch between Devin Haney and Ryan Garcia? How much does that get your juices flowing, if at all?
I'd say a little bit, yeah. I think come the time and once we've got past this weekend, I'd definitely have a bit more interest in the fight. The first fight they had, it was packed with drama, both the build up, the fight night itself, and then even after the fight, it had a really long lifeline of being spoken about and probably being probably a big lead we were using in our interviews for a while in the build up to that fight. I don't know if we get that this time. I don't think we'll see the same antics from Ryan Garcia. I know at the time a lot of us thought he was joking about it, but I do think that there was a bit of realism to them, and it was actually real problems that Garcia was going through. And I think in that year out that he's had due to his failed drug test, I think he's come back to the ground a little bit. I think he's a lot more mentally sane and in a better place now. But there's definitely unfinished business between him and Devin Haney. I think they definitely don't like each other. They're not each other's biggest fans. So I think it creates for an interesting build-up and an even bigger fight than the first time, especially looking back at the big shock of what happened last April.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well, let's go to the poll results before we let you go. We've been banging on for, an hour and 23 minutes, according to this. While Mod Father Vinny puts those up, I'll just go through the chat because I'm sure there's some we've missed. Eddie Hills says, apparently Skull and Denzel Bentley had to spar Conor Benn in 20-ounce gloves and were at different stages of camp. Eddie Hills wants Ryan Garcia against Conor Benn. I'm not going to say why, but you could probably work it out or just look at the chat. Take Me Back says, agreed, Josh, there are big fights. I'm looking forward to Garcia and Romero. Jim Smith is looking forward to Garcia and Romero. Romero wants to win more than Ryan, I reckon. So we asked you at the start of the show in our poll, Eubank Jr. versus Benn, rematch next. 63% of you said no, which kind of reflects what we've been hearing in the chat. Maybe not quite enough to reflect what we were hearing in the chat. So, yeah, it seems like the rematch, at least from the fans, and if that's reflected in the commercial possibilities, maybe it won't be next. Maybe we'll see Eubank Jr. step up and fight Canelo, step up in weight and class, and Conor Benn step down, certainly in weight, but perhaps not in class, to fight Mario Barrios. Two very good fights, maybe one more than the other, but I'm not going to say which at this stage. And Halusi Ozdemir's just put in a comment, so quickly read this out. Barboza Jr. has a really good chance to beat Lopez. This fight is 50-50 only if Lopez has taken Barboza seriously. So there you go. You heard it here first, maybe, from Halusi. Really want to thank you all for tuning in. Please do give us a like or a subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're watching on playback, you can leave comments, obviously, in the live version. You've got the live chat, but we do look at some of the comments as well. But as is customary, the co-host of this show gets the final words. So Josh Hart, what have you got?
Well, thank you all for watching yet again. Always good to be back here on Seconds Out Live. Look forward to a big week of content. Like we said, there's 2 massive fight weeks where we've got Radio Raheem and Frank out in New York, Eamon out in Saudi. I'll be on the ground from Wembley Stadium tomorrow for the Usyk Dubois 2 press conference. And just a big few weeks coming up in the boxing world. So we look forward to it. I'm looking forward to being back on Seconds Out Live soon. And yeah, thank you all for tuning in as always. Goodbye.